To get a real feel for Dubrovnik, you need to take to the medieval walls that envelop the old town, opening up vignettes of local life and providing a bird's eye view of all the attractions. As you can see, the climb is quite steep in parts, as the sturdy walls rise up from the hillside from the Pile Gate entrance, before running along a ridge and descending past the Plaza Gate. The southern walls plunge towards the Adriatic and make for great photo opportunities. Delving into the complex history of one of Europe's youngest nations throws up as many unresolved questions as answers. Croatia has been an independent nation on only 3 occasions. During the reign of the Croatian kings in the 10th and the 11th centuries, during World War II, though it was essentially a Nazi puppet state, and since 1991, after its bitter separation from Yugoslavia. Most Croats today have always felt a strong sense of national identity, despite previously being labelled as Yugoslav on their passports. All this makes gleaning unbiased historical information from within the country a tricky task. Thanks to the discovery of Krapinaman and his Neanderthal kinsmen in the Zagorje region, it has been possible to trace habitation in Croatia to 30,000 BC. The hilltop settlement where the remains were found, near the small town of Krapina, is one of the most important prehistoric sites in Europe. Along the Croatian coast, there is also a scattering of evidence that hunter-gatherers may have settled in that region at least 20,000 years ago. Well, I'm here on top of the battlements on the Old Town Wall in Dubrovnik in Croatia. Blistering hot day, but the scenery is magnificent. But unfortunately the crowds are horrendous. But we have to keep going, because once you embark on this wall trek, there's no turning back. So we continue the journey around the old walls of the old town in Dubrovnik. By the time the Greeks arrived on the island of Vis in the 4th century BC, a smattering of tribes known as the Illyrians inhabited both the coastal areas and hinterland. From 229 BC onwards, the Romans moved into the region, rapidly swallowing up large chunks of the country and beginning their makeover by building solid roads and structured towns and imposing their way of life. The Romans continued to hold sway over the region until the western part of their empire collapsed in the 5th century. For a short time, the Ostrogoths ruled Croatia before the eastern part of the Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, gained control of Istria and Dalmatia. The dominance of the first few centuries of Roman rule never really returned, with persistent threats from both the Illyrians and the Asian Avars. The Croats are widely thought to be a Slavic people who came to the region in a mass migration from the plains to the north. Their Slavic cousins, the Serbs and Slovens, are also thought to have moved to the area around this time. As more Croats arrived, their influence grew, and they acquired their own king, Tomislav, a heroic character still revered in Croatia. In securing the Croatian state in 925, Tomislav saw off both the Venetian Republic and the Hungarians. Following the end of Tomislav's reign in 928, a succession of kings took their turn as the Croatian monarch.
but Tomislav remains the symbolic hero. It was during this period that Croats began converting to Christianity. Recognition by the Pope in the 9th century marked their allegiance to the Roman rather than the Byzantine Church. Gregory, a Slav bishop, tried to establish a Croatian national church, championing the use of an alphabet called glagolitic and the performance of Mass in the vernacular. However, the Latin clergy defeated his attempts. An agreement in 1102 confirmed Hungarian control over most of Croatia, although the Croats were allowed a degree of autonomy and their own representative and parliament. The Hungarian involvement in Croatia continued for many centuries. In the first three, they faced persistent threats from the Ottoman Empire to the east. The fear of Islamic hordes underpinned the way Budapest viewed Croatia. Across the country's rugged interior, a series of fortifications were spread out as a bulwark against the Ottomans, a barrier that was ultimately successful, but often teetered on the verge of being overrun. Walking along on top of the old walls, looking out here to my right with the Adriatic Sea, turquoise blue sea this morning, quite early, with thousands upon thousands of people here. Tour buses, two major cruise liners in port this morning after having arrived overnight. So the place is pretty manic. 34 degrees actually now it is, and it's quite hard going, but it's a once in a lifetime experience. As Hungary secured much of inland Croatia, the Venetians moved in to snatch swathes of coastline, over which they took control of in 1420. Dubrovnik was one of the few places to retain its independence. The Venetians, like the Romans centuries earlier, brought in their own architectural ideas and town plans, leaving an indelible impression on the Croatian coast that lingers to this day in fortified towns, fine buildings, and elegant church towers. The Venetian hold was always tenuous, based more on securing trade routes than acquiring and governing territory, and they faced persistent threats not only from the Ottomans, but also from pirates such as the infamous marauders of Cengiz. Well, the trek along the top of the old wall in the old town of Dubrovnik continues. The crowd seems to multiply on every tower that I go through, but we keep on going. As I've said, walking along here in this heat, trying to battle for space with the thousands and thousands of visitors and tourists, one must be very careful where you step, because the surface is very, very smooth, and especially when you're videoing and taking photographs, you can miss a step very, very easily and become a cropper. The island here on my right hand side on the Adriatic is called Lockram Island, and it used to be where all the bodies were buried and disposed of when the plague hit these parts. Over the years it's become a national park, and perhaps tomorrow or Saturday we pay a visit there and have a look for ourselves. It's like Spinalonga, when we visited one of the Greek islands years ago. Spinalonga was where everybody went with the plague. They were cast away offshore, out of the way. Quite sad, but a very, very historical place also to visit. Spinalonga. And onwards and upwards I go. It seems to have got a little bit quieter in relation to the amount of people, but as you head into the wall and around the bay a bit further, you seem to get a bit more space. It's very, very hot. My goodness, it's very, very hot. There are 2 cruise ships in, each carrying over 5,000, so the amount of tour buses in port today is crazy. Up on top of the hill there right in front of me, there's a monastery, but there's a cable car which ascends in a zigzag manner towards the top of that hill. Kate wanted me to go on the cable car to the top, so we opted for a different way of getting there because I suffer at times from motion sickness, and it's, my God, it's just a precarious ride. And instead of opting for the cable car, I took a coach. But I'll show you, I'll swing around and I'll show you. And it's right up there behind me, up where the flag is. There's a monastery at the top. The cable car is a horrendous ride. A horrendous ride. For a thrill seeker, yeah, go for it. Me, no thank you. The dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that was precipitated by World War I presented an ideal opportunity for this pan-Slavism to become something more solid, with the formation of the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats and Slovenes in 1918, known as Yugoslavia after 1930. Despite high hopes and official talk of unity, many Croats were disappointed to find that, instead of the loose federalism that they had anticipated, much of the real power shifted to Belgrade. When Germany swept into Croatia in April 1941, extremist members of the Ustasja party under Ante Pavelic seized the opportunity and collaborated in the setting up of a Nazi puppet state. The war brought out the worst in some Croats, and Pavelic and his cronies established a concentration camp at Jasenovac, where Serbs, Jews and other undesirables were murdered. This sorry chapter in Croatia's history ended in 1945 with Tito's communist partisans taking control of Yugoslavia and massacring thousands of Ustasja forces and collaborators. So I've gone about 2/3 around the wall of the old town in Dubrovnik, and I'm here at the port where one can get on all the ferries to the different islands offshore. Tito, himself a Croat, kept a tight rein over Yugoslavia during his 4 decades as president and Communist Party leader. Croatian nationalism was suppressed, as were nationalist sentiments in Bosnia, Serbia and Kosovo, though they still simmered below the surface. Economic resentment grew in Croatia from the 1960s, when mass tourism started bringing in substantial amounts of hard currency, which was often siphoned away from the coast to swell central government coffers in Belgrade. The disenchantment helped to fuel desires for greater self-government, which manifested itself in the Croatian Spring. This involved reform-minded politicians and intellectuals, some of whom called for Croatian to be recognized as a separate language from Serbian. The Croatian League of Communists was split between those who wanted to keep the status quo and those looking for greater autonomy a tension that was expressed in student riots in the early 1970s. Seeing the unity of Yugoslavia threatened, Tito moved in to clamp down on the Croatian Spring with sackings and forced resignations in December 1971. Slovenia declared independence from Yugoslavia on the same day as Croatia did, on the 25th of June 1991. However, with far fewer ethnic Serbs amongst its population, and with no history of ethnic cleansing, it did not provoke the savage reaction from Serbia that Croatia drew. Now, having just covered a little bit over 2/3 of my trek along the medieval walls surrounding the old town of Dubrovnik in Croatia, a day of blistering conditions, gorgeous temperatures, but very, very hot and no shade. Thousands upon thousands of steps and millions upon millions of tourists. But I enjoyed this once in a lifetime experience. An experience that I've been longing to have for so many years. And today I've achieved my goal. So in the next episode, I'll conclude the walk on the medieval walls around the old town in Dubrovnik. And I hope you enjoy the journey with me so far, and thank you for tagging along.